Hi, and welcome to The View from Washington with The Hindu. I'm Sriram Lakshman, coming to you from Washington, D.C. In this final episode, we're going to look at the recently concluded U.S. general election, which resulted in the victory of Donald Trump. We're going to look at who voted for Trump, some of the issues that motivated his supporters. We'll also look at some probable appointments that he's going to make, the U.S.-India relationship, as well as some reactions from world leaders. Stay tuned. So in terms of the results, Donald Trump has won 295 electoral college votes versus Kamala Harris's 226 votes. A minimum of 270 votes is required to win the presidency. So even without Nevada and Arizona being called yet by the Associated Press, which is the de facto caller of results for elections as far as the media is concerned, Trump already has a sizable majority, but he also looks set to win the popular vote by around 3%. And this is not something that's happened as far as a Republican candidate is concerned since 2004 when George W. Bush last won it. So he's got a very strong mandate. And it's not just this. Right now, Republicans have taken control of 53 seats in the Senate, which is a 100-seat chamber, and Democrats have 45 seats. And Republicans also look like they could win a majority in the House of Representatives. 218 seats are required for that. Right now, they have 211 seats. So what this means is that the Republican Party is going to have a control, basically, of all the organs of government in Washington. It's called a government trifecta. They will control the U.S. Senate, they'll control the U.S. House of Representatives, and Donald Trump will be in the White House. Also know that the nature of the Supreme Court has changed. There are 3 Trump-appointed Supreme Court judges. This is very unusual for a president to have that many appointees in a single term. And the way the Supreme Court has been voting of late, there's definitely a strong shift towards conservatism. So Donald Trump comes in with a strong mandate, and he's got all these institutions working in his favor. That's going to make for some very interesting times. So who voted for Donald Trump? Let's look at the majority of the population, white voters. They supported Donald Trump and Kamala Harris in about the same proportions that they had supported Donald Trump and Joe Biden in 2020. Trump did overall better with men, and Kamala Harris did better with women. And 53% of white women supported Donald Trump, 46% of white women supported Kamala Harris, according to AP Votecast, which is an exit poll conducted by the Associated Press. The overwhelming number, almost all black women supported Kamala Harris. 60% of Hispanic supported Harris. Trump, as I had mentioned, did better with men, doing even better with younger men. Kamala Harris did well with women, and she did better with younger women. Now, the support for Trump among Hispanic voters increased by 14 percentage points from 2020, according to Edison Research, which conducted an exit poll. Roughly half of Latino men voted for Harris. This is down from the 60% of Latino men who voted for Joe Biden in 2020, again, according to AP Votecast. Also, overall, Biden won Hispanic men and women by 60%. Harris, the support for Harris in that community, men and women, Hispanic men and women, were a few percentage points lower. Overall, support for Harris went down slightly amongst black voters relative to Biden, driven by black men supporting Trump more than they did in 2020, again, according to AP Votecast. 3 in 10 black men under 45 voted for Donald Trump, and this is roughly 2 times of the support he got from that demographic in 2020. Finally, if you look at the support for Harris from college graduates, they're in the mid-50s, and the support for Trump from non-college graduates, that's also in the mid-50s. This happened across ethnic groups. So Trump also did well relative to his performance in 2020 with Gen Z and with millennials. And he also did well in college-educated suburbs around Washington, D.C. And what's really startling is that you take New York State or New York City, these are Democratic Party bastions. Trump actually increased his margins by 12 percentage points across the state and 7 percentage points across New York City relative to 2020. I mean, Kamala Harris still won the state and the city, but this is pretty remarkable. So basically what we're seeing is a broad coalition of support for Trump across demographics that are often thought to be or have been the core support base of the Democratic Party. So what were the factors that pushed people to vote for Trump? Well, the main issue was economy and then immigration or illegal migration, to be specific, and then abortion and democracy. So abortion and democracy, these were the themes around which the Harris campaign revolved. They were important, but they were outranked by economy and immigration. So inflation and the state of the economy were the top reasons why people voted to have Donald Trump back. Exit poll data shows that people are concerned by the price of groceries and healthcare costs. Now, there's been global inflation. We talked about this after the IMF meetings in an earlier episode. Inflation is coming down in countries, including in the United States, after hitting a peak in 2022. Rates are being cut, but not everybody is aware that there's been a global issue with the pandemic as far as inflation is concerned. And then you had the invasion of Ukraine by Russia and the war between Russia and Ukraine. And people are more focused on their memory of how it was during Trump's time and how it is now. Prices are so much higher now, and they're not necessarily going to be looking at the reasons or arguing that, well, there are forces beyond any single government's control and so forth. So people just decided to break with the current scenario and try Donald Trump again, whom they are familiar with. And in terms of abortion, something interesting happened. There were 10 states that had an abortion question on the ballot in terms of abortion rights. 7 of these 10 states voted to preserve or expand abortion rights, and 3 states, the measures failed in 3 states, in Florida, in South Dakota, and in Nebraska. So some of the states that voted to preserve or expand abortion rights also voted for Donald Trump. So voters are comfortable voting one way for the federal government, for the White House, for the Republican Party, but at the same time preserving or expanding abortion rights at the subnational or state level. So after Donald Trump won, Narendra Modi tweeted congratulations to him, and the two men also had a phone call. They shared a certain bonhomie. They're both from the right of the political spectrum. Trump joined Modi in Houston in 2019 at the Howdy Modi rally. Trump also flew to India in February 2020, just before the pandemic, on a state visit. I think we're going to see more of that. But in terms of the relationship, the US-India relationship, I think we can examine the effects of a Trump administration at 2 levels. One is the direct impact, the first order impact, and the second is the second and third order impact. And by that, I mean the actions that the Trump administration takes with regard to China, or what will happen if China decides to invade Taiwan, how will the US react to that, or the US position on Israel and Gaza, or how the US will position itself between Ukraine and Russia, whether that conflict will come to an end soon, what that means for India's purchase of oil from Russia. So these second and third order impacts, or for example, what happens in the medium and long term to the world and to India if the US pulls out of the Paris Climate Accord again. So there are so many ifs and buts here, and it's difficult to analyze what will happen to India and other countries through the second and third order route. If we look at the direct impacts, I think fundamentally we can say 2 things. One is that the US-India relationship is going to grow. Why? Because Trump has already demonstrated an interest in growing and strengthening that relationship when he was in the White House previously. And 2, because there is a certain momentum in Washington that is geared at strengthening that relationship, because there's bipartisan consensus that the US-India relationship being strong is good for the United States. 2, there's institutional momentum in the Department of Defense and in the State Department that is geared towards promoting and growing that relationship. The Biden administration had also, of course, done its part and started a number of initiatives, most notably the initiative on critical and emerging technologies. I think this will continue. Trump might emphasize different aspects of it. India will also have to pay up quite a bit more, I feel, over the next 4 years in a Trump administration. And that's because Donald Trump follows a philosophy of transactionalism in his foreign policy, even with close allies, friends, and partners. I think India will have to continue arms purchases from the US. B, I think it will have to buy energy. When the US sanctions on Iran and Venezuela kicked in during Trump 1.0, India was expected to increase its purchases of US energy. That's going to happen again, I feel, especially if India wants to continue its purchases of Russian oil. It's going to have to, in a sense, keep Trump sweet, as it were, by buying goods and oil and arms, I think, from the United States. I think a trade deal could also be in the offing. India has actually been making a number of deals and is in talks with certain countries such as the UK for free trade deals. The Biden administration had stepped back from this trade deal approach. It was more for the framework approach. It launched IPEF, the Indo-Pacific Economic Framework. One pillar of that was a trade pillar. India, of course, did not join that trade pillar. But anyway, I think that's a moot point because Trump has said he's going to get rid of IPEF. Soon, in the early days of Trump 1.0, he pulled the US out of the Trans-Pacific Partnership. So I think he will follow through and dissolve the IPEF, instead focusing on a trade deal, a mini trade deal with India. So I think that could happen. There's also going to be next to zero or no discussion around democracy and human rights. The Biden administration used to raise its concerns on these matters with the Modi government. And India, more recently, it said these discussions are run both ways, and India used to raise its concerns as well. A lot of these discussions happened privately, away from the media. Sometimes they would be leaked to the media. Sometimes they would appear in at joint press. These concerns would surface in joint press conferences. I think with Trump 2.0, we're not going to see much of that, if any, at all. So in terms of the presidential transition, the co-chairs of Donald Trump's transition team are the CEO of Cantor Fitzgerald, Howard Lutnick, and Linda McMahon, who is a business executive from the world of wrestling, and she's associated with the World Wrestling Entertainment, WWE, and she and Lutnick are both billionaires. Tulsi Gabbard, who used to be a Democrat, is also part of the team. What do we know so far in terms of appointments? Susan Wiles has been appointed the future chief of staff. She is the first woman who will hold that position.
Susie, come here. Come here, Susie. Chris, come here, Chris. Susie likes to stay sort of in the back, let me tell you. The Ice Maiden, we call her the Ice Maiden.
Now, she is a long-time political operative. She's helped several Republican candidates win their campaign, including Rick Scott when he became the governor of Florida. And incidentally, Rick Scott just won a second U.S. Senate term from Florida. And Susan Wiles also campaigned for Florida Governor Ron DeSantis. But in 2020, they had a falling out. In 2016, she had helped Trump in Florida, and that eventually helped on his path to the White House. In 2020, after her falling out with Ron DeSantis, she moved to Trump. She's somebody who's known to work behind the scenes. Trump made a reference to this in his election night victory speech as well. And she doesn't have much of a presence on social media. She, as the future chief of staff, White House chief of staff, is going to control access to Trump. She will have a major role to play in what papers he sees, and therefore she will have a strong voice and policy. And so Donald Trump comes to Washington with a strong mandate given his performance in the elections. He has a lot of plans, including on the campaign. He said on day one he's going to get going with mass deportations of undocumented migrants, and then he's got all these tax cuts planned. So there's like a lot of work that he's planning to do, notwithstanding the regular work of a new government, making appointments and so forth. So she's going to have a major role in that. And there was some reporting earlier, notably by the Financial Times, that Lutnick was interviewing people for a potential Trump 2.0. This was a few months ago. And one of the top qualities, if not the top quality of what he was looking for, was personal loyalty to Donald Trump. You'll remember that in the Trump administration a few years ago, there was a high turnaround of personnel, people getting fired and so on and so forth when they and Trump didn't see eye to eye on matters. Well, this time around, Trump's going to make sure that not only are they personally loyal to him, they also fully buy into his program. So who's going to form part of the new Trump administration? Well, things could change, but let's start with the Secretary of State. A few names are doing the rounds. One is former U.S. Ambassador to Germany, Richard Grenell. He had ruffled a few feathers in Berlin the last time around. Another is Senator Bill Hagerty. He is a U.S. Senator from Tennessee. He was also the former U.S. Ambassador to Japan. Another is Robert O'Brien. Robert O'Brien was Trump's former national security advisor. In terms of U.S. Ambassador to the United Nations, Elise Stefanik, member of the U.S. House of Representatives from New York, her name is being discussed, and she has already made comments about reviewing U.S. funding for the UN. She said the UN is anti-Semitic. Some of her positions are not unlike the positions of Nikki Haley when Haley was the U.S. Ambassador to the UN in the first Trump administration. Another person who's likely to have an important role, at least a de facto role, in the Trump administration is SpaceX founder and owner of social media site X, Elon Musk. Elon Musk, through his financial might and his media power behind the election of Donald Trump.
Who did you say? Oh, let me tell you, we have a new star. A star is born, Elon. Now he is.
A few hours ago, Axios reported that on a Wednesday call between Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky and Donald Trump, that Elon Musk was actually present. And this is a sign of how powerful Elon Musk is likely to be in the new administration. A number of world leaders have called and congratulated Donald Trump. We've already spoken about Prime Minister Narendra Modi. President Zelensky of Ukraine, of course, also had this phone call with Donald Trump and has messaged him publicly where he said he appreciates Donald Trump's peace through strength approach. Now, you'll know that they've not always had an easy relationship. The testiness of their dynamic was on display in September when Zelensky met Trump in New York. Trump has a relationship with Russian President Vladimir Putin that is not fully known and understood. We know he admires Vladimir Putin, and we know that he wants the Ukraine-Russia conflict to come to a swift end. We know that Donald Trump is not a fan of continuing financial and military assistance to Ukraine. So what the contours of this deal are, or how favorable they will be to the Ukrainian president, are unknown. Other leaders who have congratulated Donald Trump include the president of China, Xi Jinping, as well as Vladimir Putin. Xi Jinping talked about a relationship of mutual respect between the United States and China and peaceful coexistence. China and the United States began a trade war during the first administration of Donald Trump that Donald Trump set off. Pretty much at every campaign rally, Donald Trump has brought up China. He's talked about increasing tariffs against China. He's also talked about how he has a good relationship and gets along with Xi Jinping. So it's difficult to see exactly how this relationship is going to progress. I think we can expect trade battles and we can expect tensions because a number of people that Trump has surrounded himself with are China hawks, including a few of those whose names I mentioned. Well, that was the last episode of The View from Washington. I hope you found it informative and you enjoyed tuning in. I want to say a big thank you to the production team in India, Shikha, Kumari, Kanishka Balachandran, and Aniket Singh Chauhan, among others. This would not have been possible without them. I look forward to seeing you again soon. Thanks for tuning in.